Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Coffee. Without it, we would never have had the Industrial Revolution. We'd all be still living in Europe in mud huts. Here in Laredo, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike. 4501 McPherson, the best coffee on the planet. If you can't get to Laredo, you can order from the organicmancoffeetrike.shop. Welcome to Story Time with Chris James. I will now pick up right where I left off. Chapter 10, Field Tripping. Pam parked in the dirt parking lot out front and went in to report for duty. Hildy was at her desk, thumbing through some magazine called Guns and Coffee. It must be one of Mr. Armstrong's reading collection. But then it could have come from Techno, coffee, but with guns. Is Madame Dingus in? Pam looked at the status board, but couldn't see the madam's name. She's in her new office, a.k.a. the dining room. Hildy barely glanced up to see if Pam was really standing there or just some disembodied voice. New office? I haven't assigned the dining room yet. Well, too late. The madam has already moved in. Hildy pulled the magazine up in front of her face as if hiding from Pam. Pam wanted to stay and find out if Hildy and Hilda were actually the same person, but the matter of the dining room seemed to have need looking into. Madame Dingus moving into the biggest office in the building was going to cause friction with the others, like Carol Munchausen, who wanted the extra room to accommodate her larger clients, like horses and cows and such. I guess I'll be in the dining room then, and Pam made her way down the short corridor to the back of the house. Pam knocked and then opened the door. Madame Dingus was already ensconced at the dining room table. Her cards were set out, ready for her next client. Ah, Pamela dear. I took the liberty of moving in down here since I'm now in charge of the missing persons investigation and I'll be needing more room. Pam wanted to dispute the woman's claim to the room, but her folks had instilled an overpowering habit of always listening to her elders because someday she'd be old and crazy, so she should show some respect if she ever hoped to get any back. Have a seat. Let's go over your assignment. Madame Dingus pointed to a folding metal chair that had taken the place of one of the many huge wooden monstrosities ranging about the table. Pam sat down, only to discover the chair was so low her chin was now just above the tabletop. She felt as if she were 10 years old again. And now I expect you to be here each morning to fill me in on any details that come up during the night. Madame Dingus shoved a stack of papers a foot high over in front of Pam's nose. Go through these and figure out who is missing and who is really missing. Pam stood up so she could look at the top page. Missing Persons Report was emblazoned across the top of each form. Are these from the police? Yes, I had a friend of mine send over every case for the last 10 years. Do you think we can just focus on... I think it best we begin with these files and see where they lead us. Madame Dingus was convinced she was being guided by mysterious channels, when in reality she'd just had a bad dream. Just say yes and get us out of here. One of the voices in Pam's head came to the rescue. I'll do as you wish. Why don't I take these to my office so they don't clutter up your new desk? Pam grabbed the stack of papers and slipped out the door before the madam could think of some reason not to. Hildy was still hiding behind her magazine as Pam stalked past and turned the corner to her office. Pam's office was just a room, 10 feet by 10 feet. Originally, the room had been bigger, but something happened way back, and this was all that was left. The wall that wasn't window was covered from floor to ceiling with bookshelves, devoid of anything even slightly resembling a book. The desk was old and sturdy, built to stop a runaway train if ever you felt the need to stop a train using a desk. On it sat a pen set with two number 2 pencils sticking up from it and a snow globe. The chair looked as if a very heavy man had sat in it one too many dozen times. Pam shoved the stack of missing persons report into a convenient shelf and dropped into the chair. Her eyes fell on the snow globe. I hope Hortense is back from wherever she went. Pam jumped up and went out to Hildy's desk. Is Hortense back yet? That woman? Who cares? Hildy didn't exactly see eye to eye with the scryer, but then few people did. Has she come in today, or has anyone seen her? Pam tried to use her best "I'm the boss" voice, but only sounded like a schoolgirl inquiring as to the location of the little girl's room. Haven't seen her and don't want to. Hildy got her head down behind her magazine even farther. I'll just run upstairs and have a look then. Pam looked up the stairway and hoped it wouldn't be a fruitless endeavor. After coming to work here, Pam had surmounted these stairs on many occasions, but they were still a daunting task. She began to climb as if working her way up the summit of Everest. As her head came even with the 3rd floor, Prince Wapo came into view. He was curled up, sleeping in the middle of the top step. This struck Pam as odd, but everything about this giant cat was odd. She huffed and puffed her way past the furry beast. The 3rd floor hallway was cleared of all the paperwork. Pam walked to the door to room 3E, which stood open. She stuck her head in and surveyed the room. It looked as if Hortense had just stepped out, but would be back at any second. There was a pile of books set atop the table, used as a desk. Several coffee cups were scattered about. The bookshelves were covered with snow globes, some cheap and small, and others enormous and expensive-looking. The scenes inside each was as varied as snowflakes they represented. Several hand mirrors were snugged away in whichever space was available. A chair was sitting in front of a big round mirror with an ornate frame around its edge. Pam looked closely at the mirror. Nothing jumped out at her and screamed bad things have been going on around here. Pam stepped closer to get a better look. With each step, the feeling of danger grew more robust. Pam placed one hand on the back of the chair and stared into the reflective glass. Her image looked back at her with a startled look on her face. Man, I've got to do something about my wardrobe. Pam's school uniform looked as if she'd just returned from a battle on the losing side. Something moved quickly just behind her image in the glass. Something huge and black. Pam spun around to see what was trying to sneak up on her and devour her. She nearly screamed in fright. "Hey, Pam, what's up?" Hortense stood in the center of the room, a fresh cup of coffee in her hand. "Oh, Lord, I thought I was being snuck up on by something." Pam felt all weak and wobbly after receiving such a fright. "No one seems to know where you were for the last few days." "Been here looking for clues." Hortense set the cup down near the ornate mirror and stood looking at Pam. "I heard you've been placed on special assignment. You're working for Madame Dingus now?" Pam was surprised word had spread so quickly. Well, now I can spend more time looking for these missing kids. Pam looked at the giant mirror. Just be careful, okay? And never before had a mirror looked so malevolent. As Pam went back towards the stairs, she glanced into room 3D. The door was open just a crack. Miss Della Noche, everything okay in there? Pam stuck her head through the door. The room looked as if the IRS audit had just gone south. The room was littered with papers strewn all about. The desk was flipped on its side. All the contents were in a pile. The chair was what got Pam's attention. It was sticking into the wall where Dolores's big mirror used to hang. Only the swivel base was visible. The glass from the mirror was scattered about the floor. The seat belts were a shredded mess. What can we do? How do we get her back? Pam stood at the coffee bar looking at her co-workers for help. Try not to worry. Dolores is a big girl and she can take care of herself. Cassandra was doing her best to ease Pam while trying to come up with a plan to rescue the scryer while not knowing any of the details involved. And remember, she has a black belt in Tai Chi. For those of you not in the know, Tai Chi is a form of exercise, not martial arts. Mikey Baba Ganoush tried to help. You could try venturing into the land of the mirrors again. No, this came from several voices at once. The last time she barely got out. Eddie thought back to that night when Pam became trapped in the giant mirror in the basement. The gathered staff all grew quiet. None could think of anything even kind of close to a good idea, let alone a bad one. We've got to do something, Pam felt desperate. Maybe we could... Eddie kind of ran out of words as he ran out of ideas. Naomi Cuthbert went missing under the same circumstances 20 years ago, and she's still missing. Pam felt a tear trying to burst forth in the flood of face-soaking fluids. She quickly gulped down her coffee and her fears. How about you do step into the land of mirrors, but you take somebody with you? Mikey wanted to mend any fences he might have damaged earlier. Are you volunteering? Eddie asked from behind the bar. See, it's just that I can't right now. Mikey grew quiet as his excuses ran dry. I'll go alone. I have to do something. Pam felt about as brave as any high school girl volunteering for a trip into the unknown. I'll go with you. This caused everybody to turn and look at Barbara. What the heck? It might just be fun. She sounded less enthusiastic than she felt, which was not at all. You don't have to, but yes, I'd love to have you along. Pam was glad to have somebody along in case things got dicey. Eddie piled a bunch of sandwiches into Barbara's backpack. Some of them actually looked consumable. Next, he filled a thermos with coffee and stored this in Pam's book bag. This way the food wouldn't get too squashed, and the pair might just have an enjoyable repast if things took longer than planned. Barbara grabbed all of her hiking toys and secured them into the various pockets and pouches that adorned her ghost hunting vest. A compass, lighter, a fire starter, a knife, etc. Lastly, she hooked a pistol belt, festooned with deadly-looking contrivances around her waist. Pam borrowed a jacket with less burns in it than her shirt. The jacket, a leather with lots of zippered pockets. Lots of zippered pockets. Into the pockets went a flashlight and a pack of gum. She tried to think of important, useful, and life-saving gadgets, but she came up short. Let's go before I change my mind. She waited for somebody to tell her to not go and then headed for the front desk. Barbara was right behind her, followed by the rest of the bag staff, all wishing they didn't feel so squeamish about the trip ahead. Cassandra was about to tell Pam to wait, but became distracted by a dark shadow that appeared and then disappeared in the corner next to the bar. Wanda Murkowski was left alone with her thoughts and a cup of fresh coffee. As the group traipsed past Hildy's desk, the receptionist put down her magazine just long enough to wonder where everybody was going. When they turned the corner and proceeded to the basement door, she fell in, using this as an excuse to visit Mr. Armstrong and see if he had any more reading material at hand. The stairs leading down into what had once been a horrifying nightmare of dark walls, spider webs, and dirt floor had been transformed into something resembling a construction site. The two-story frame had been erected at the bottom of the steps. The lower floor was to be office space, while the floor above would be much-needed storage. So far, only the wooden frame was in place. Mr. Armstrong acted as if 12 people traipsing down the stairs was an everyday behavior, only looking up when Hildy asked him a question. "Got any more of those gun magazines around?" She gave him a sultry look. Mr. Armstrong was best described as a mountain of flesh stuffed into a suit with many weapons in easy reach. Being as he was relaxing, his suit jacket was hung over a rifle rack mounted on the bare wood studs that made up his office walls. This wasn't just a rifle rack, it was more like a wall where festooned with racks filled with death-dealing deadly devices of joy. Mr. Armstrong was the company's troubleshooter, literally. His job title was Semi-Licensed Investigator. Semi-licensed because what he did for a living, there wasn't a license available. "I just got this one in today." He held up a copy of Cooking While Under Fire. All about how to prepare a 4-course meal while defending your bunker or foxhole. He eyeballed the staff as they sauntered by on the other side of the unfinished wall. "What's with the parade?" Eddie looked over. "Pam and Barbara are going to enter the land of mirrors." Mr. Armstrong looked a bit paler than usual. "Is that a good idea?" He didn't want anybody to know that he worried about Pam a lot. "We ran out of ideas." Eddie put his hands out to the side to emphasize his meaning. Mr. Armstrong was out of his chair before any thoughts crossed his mind. As the tag end of the followers passed his door, he fell in behind. The troop made their way to the far wall. The far wall was somewhere in the vicinity of the next block over. 300 yards was a good guess. This was just one more bizarre anomaly in the bogus anomalous group's mansion. The farther they got from the stairs, the darker the basement became. Cement had been poured to make a floor for the construction project, but it stopped long before the gang reached the far wall. Dirt littered with construction materials and old discarded furniture was the only thing to be seen. Pam stopped in front of the wooden frame with planks nailed across it, as if trying to hold back an army of zombies. The Civil War soldiers were good at gardening, but not much when it came to construction. She looked at the boards, run in every direction. "Anybody bring a crowbar?" She looked around the gathered staff. "Well, looks like you're not going anywhere." Cassandra tried to get Pam to turn back towards the stairs. "Let's try something else." Barbara grabbed one of the boards and pulled. The whole frame fell over to the ground. It wasn't nailed to anything. She looked at the boards at her feet. Now the giant mirror was accessible to the gathering. The mirror was old and heavy. It had sat here since nobody could remember, probably stored down here by some ancient ancestor of Pam's, back when bigger was better. The weight had pushed the frame down into the dirt floor. The mirror was still well over everyone's head. Even Hortense would have had room to step through. Now what? Barbara asked, nobody in particular. We have to step through the glass while being distracted so we don't realize we're doing it. The last 2 times anybody had passed through this glass, Pam being pursued by a giant man-eating, a girl-eating creature waiting to eat a girl, and the second time she'd been distracted by thinking about how this couldn't possibly work. How do we do that? Barbara placed one hand on the glass. It felt cold to the touch and very mysterious. The last time I walked backwards and I just passed right through. Pam was loathing to try this again, but her options were few and Dolores was still missing. Barbara turned her back on the mirror. Pam stepped up next to her. Now all there was to do was to walk and see what happened. They took 1 step backwards, followed by a second, and then a third. Just as their feet were about to hit the glass, Eddie yelled, "Hey!" And they stepped into the land of the mirrors. Pam's first thought was to run back through the portal and forget this whole idea. Last time, it was a lot scarier. I can imagine. Barbara looked at the bad guys, all looking at their own reflection on the other side of the mirror. Just maybe this is the wrong time to ask this, but how do we get back? Kind of the same way, just have to find something to distract ourselves as we get there. Pam looked at the long hallway stretching out to infinity. Windows of all sizes and shapes letting in light from whatever they might be mounted. So how do we figure out which one is the right one? Barbara looked through one of the many mirrors close to where they stood. Pam turned and looked at her companion. Now you think of that? I thought you had some kind of a plan. Me? You're the expert. You've already been here. This is my first trip. The 2 misadventurers glared at each other. This is getting us nowhere. Let's see if we can spot anything down the hall. Barbara waited for Pam to take the lead. The land of mirrors was far from being any kind of land. It was more like the never-ending hallway of mirrors. The 2 sides were only 4 feet apart, and the walls were 8 feet high. The only light source was what came through many mirrors in rooms with lights on, or car mirrors in the daylight. There were vast stretches of wall where no mirrors were seen. Other times the mirrors were so plentiful they touched on all sides. Would you look at that? I can see the inside of the... Oh, no, don't look. Barbara tried to scrub the memory from her mind. You have to be careful what you look at down here. Pam thought about it. In here? Well, while we're here. The 2 carefully began to long walk towards the other end of the Hall of Mirrors, which was something like 200,000 miles away, give or take something. Pam checked her watch and saw they'd been walking for 3 hours now. Just now figured out she should have let her mother know she would be at the office and might be late getting home. She felt her pockets for her phone, just as she remembered it was sitting by the front door. Cat sneezing. Barbara was busy checking a few of her many and varied gadgets. Nothing electronic seems to be working down here. Or are we down here? Where are we anyway? She didn't really expect an answer. They stopped and tried to think of what they should try next. 6:30 p.m. was a fairly safe time to glance into people's houses. Some were busy sitting in front of TV sets, watching whatever they felt was important enough to drain away their few precious hours on Earth. Others were cooking or fixing food to consume alone or with others. Most mirrors showed empty rooms or crowded streets. They walked along, unable to think of anything worth saying. Then, hey, look at that. Pam pointed at what looked to be a chair sticking out from the wall several yards away. They rushed over to have a closer look. It very much looked like the chair Dolores had used in her office. The safety belts were there, and some looked as if they'd been shredded. This is the chair Dolores was using. Now, where can she be? It wasn't as if there were many options, as she would have been ahead of them somewhere since she wasn't anywhere they had just walked. Just to be sure, the two adventurers both looked back the way they had come. Nope, not back there, Barbara stated the obvious. Wait a second. Pam looked at the chair sticking halfway into the hallway, and then she turned and looked at the mirror across from the chair. There sat Hortense, gazing into her mirror, not seeing Pam or Barbara looking back at her. Without thinking, Pam waved at her friend. Hortense had returned to her office, trying to gain some small clue as to what had happened to Dolores. As she gazed into the mirror, a slight movement caught her eye. She moved closer to the glass while gripping the edge of the table at the same time. It looked as if a light were blinking in the distant reaches of the looking-glass. Barbara was flashing out Morse code into Hortense's face. What are you saying? Pam didn't know anything about Morse code, other than it involved blinking lights and lots of memory. I just said to tell the gang we found the chair and we're still looking for Dolores. Barbara hoped the giant scryer could read Morse code. Hortense watched as the light blinked on and off, and it looked as if some kind of an alien spacecraft were trying to communicate through the glass. Wait. It's a code from the other side. Hortense jumped up and ran for the door. All the bag members were standing around the mirror at the far end of the basement as Hortense came flying down the stairs. Where is Barbara? Hortense gasped for breath. I need her to read. She's not here. She went with Pam into the mirror, remember? Eddie said. The look he gave said volumes. Then how can we know what she's saying? Hortense felt disappointment as big as her stature. No problem. I'm a scoutmaster. Lead the way. Mr. Armstrong had been an Eagle Scout, and now he was, indeed, the head of a troop. Hortense remembered this discover while camping in the woods as they searched for Pam, who was searching for Bigfoot and lost. The trip upstairs was far slower than the mad dash coming down. Pam and Barbara stood around waiting for Hortense to get back. Pam hoped that was what was meant when the overly tall woman had held up one finger before scrambling from the room. After what had felt like hours but was only 10 minutes, the room on the other side of the looking-glass began to fill with her friends. Once the gathering had settled down into a sort of order, Barbara began blinking her flashlight, sending out a message as to what they had found. Mr. Armstrong pulled out his pistol. Then he unhooked the light from the bottom of the barrel. He used it to respond. Blink, 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 blink went back and forth as those unknowing words of Morse stood and watched. Finally, Cassandra could wait no longer. So what are they saying? Mr. Armstrong blinked a few more letters before answering. They found Dolores's chair and they're looking for the body. That doesn't sound like the sort of thing Pamela would say. I'm not talking with Pam, I'm talking with Barbara. Mr. Armstrong never bothered to look around as he spoke. Oh, Cassandra felt as if a bit more tact was called for, but wasn't about to tell Mr. Armstrong. Pam watched as the gang back home, back at the office, all looked at where they thought Pam or Barbara might be. So what'd they say? They said okay, Barbara signed off. That's all? I thought with all that blinking and blinking, you were having a long conversation. They said to be careful and hurry back. Barbara added the last bit to make Pam feel better. Now what? Pam looked about them, wondering if this had been just the absolutely dumbest thing she had tried in a long time. She turned around to look for an answer, maybe written on the wall behind her. Look, it's Dolores. Pam pointed at the mirror on the opposite wall. It was just a few feet down from the chair. Dolores was laying on the floor of some unknown location. The room was too dark to see any details, but the flak vest and the helmet were just visible, still in place. It looked as if she was not alone. Barbara spun around and looked, and then sent a hurried message back to the office. Mr. Armstrong grunted. He scratched his head before attempting to pass on the code he had just read. They just said they found Dolores, and she's a creep. He stared into the mirror as if willing it to straighten out the misunderstanding. No, wait. They found Dolores, and she's asleep. Can you bring her back to the mirror in the basement? Cassandra was praying this whole misadventure would end soon. I don't think so. She's on the other side of another mirror. No, they don't know where. He sat and stared at the mirror, attempted to try punching his huge fist through the glass to rescue Pam, and Barbara as well. Now what? He asked nobody in particular. Pam looked at Dolores, who looked no worse for the wear, lying in a dark room on the other side of the glass in some unknown location. She tried pounding on the glass in an attempt to maybe wake the missing scryer. Miss Delanoche, Dolores, can you hear me? She pounded harder on the glass. Barbara looked at the sides of the looking-glass mounted on the wall of the hallway. Do you think we could get through this one somehow? She rapped on the cold, hard glass with her knuckles. Pam looked at her as if she had lost her mind, but then they had come through one mirror, why not two? Yes, but this one is kind of up off the floor. The mirror sat 2 feet up from the floor. It was nowhere near as big as the one they had passed through, but it was big enough to pass through if they could jump into it. I'll run at it and jump through. Pam backed up to get a good start. Whoa, no way. You'll need a bigger run if you're going to jump like that. Barbara looked at Pam, who was all of 4 feet away. How about you run down the hallway, and I'll grab you as you go by and swing you into the glass? I guess. Not having a better plan, Pam hoped this would hopefully work. She walked back down the hall until she felt it was far enough, then turned and started running. Just as Pam was level with the mirror, Barbara grabbed her arm and spun her towards the mirror. It might have worked had she gotten Pam centered enough to go through the mirror instead of slamming headfirst into the wall just to the left. Pam just slid down the wall and became a crumpled heap on the floor. Oh, shoot. I'm sorry. I misjudged the radius of the swing. Are you okay? Are you alive? Can you speak? Birdies! Pam looked up at the yellow birds flying circles around her head. There were twice as many of them since her eyes were crossed. Barbara felt a twinge of mortification. How about I run and you spin me? She looked down at her sort of boss. Yeah. Pam tried to get to her feet, but the floor kept moving up the wall. She fell forwards and would have brained herself on the opposite wall if not for the chair. She wound up leaning against the swivel base. Octopus! She smacked at the base, causing it to spin, causing her to be dropped to the floor once more. Barbara had moved back in an attempt to get a running start and avoid any swinging fists in case Pam came up swinging. Ready, here I come. Barbara began running at Pam. As she came closer, she closed her eyes. At the last second, Barbara yelled, Pam, caught off guard, threw up her hands and pushed Barbara away, sending her flying into the wall. Barbara went head first through the mirror. With her head splitting and her vision slowly coming into focus, Pam became aware she was now alone in the hallway. Barbara was now on the other side of the other mirror, still in an unknown location. Leaning her head against the glass, Pam looked into the other world. There she saw Barbara trying to get to her feet. As she began to rise, she suddenly slumped to the floor, laying in a heap next to Dolores. Oh, shoot. It looks as if Barbara had landed on Dolores. Pam went back to the mirror, giving her a slight connection to her friends. She was about to send them a message telling them about what had just become of their best-laid plan. She pulled her flashlight out, and then it became obvious she didn't know Morse code, which meant she could not communicate with anyone. Oh, this is just stupid. And she felt like crying, but already knew this did little to nothing as far as fixing anything. Mr. Armstrong was blinking his light. "What did you tell her?" Cassandra asked. "I just told them to not do anything stupid and wait for us to come up with a plan." He sat waiting for Barbara to respond. "What did they say?" "Burgelingdengrachtenmargen." Mr. Armstrong sat with a worried look on his face. "I think there just might be a problem over there." He pointed at his reflection. Chapter 12. This is not a fine mess. Pam pulled herself up from the floor. Her headache was still with her, but at least her vision had cleared up. The pile of women on the other side of the looking-glass were all still as if dead. Pam tried to catch sight of any slightest movement to tell her they were at least still breathing. The room they occupied was quite dark, and the angle was wrong, making it hard to see very well. Pam could only stare and wish. "Great, now what do I do?" she asked the wall next to her. Had it responded in any way, she may have taken the advice. Mr. Armstrong was still intensely staring at the back of her head. Pam turned and tried to yell at him, but this hadn't worked the last time either. "This is another fine mess I've gotten myself into." Pam wanted to fall to the floor and have a good long cry. Try blaming all of her problems on some unknown evil entity that was out to get her. That hadn't worked the last time she tried it, so she vetoed it and looked for a solution that didn't involve crying or pouting. Turning back to the mirror, the one Barbara had slipped through, as opposed to the other 100,000 mirrors, Pam tried to force her vision to pick up on any clues that might let her know where the two bag operatives might be now that they were not where they should be. The room they were in was dark. It looked like it was probably old, and there was probably furniture, but Pam couldn't make out any details. It looked as if moonlight was coming in through a window, but this only made Pam realize how late she was going to be for dinner, if she got home tonight at all. "Oh, man, Mom is going to kill me." She considered this. Well, maybe not kill me, but probably lock me in my room forever. More thought. Lock me in the guest bedroom, then. She wondered if Sarah would be willing to smuggle in things to keep Pam entertained. On the other side of the looking-glass, yes, the one Barbara was on, something moved. Pam watched as what must be a door, because it swung open like a door, would letting in just a bit more moonlight. The doorway suddenly filled by something. It was dark-shaped, moving in the dark room, but it didn't move like any man. Or any woman, for that matter. As Pam watched, it rushed into view and turned in her direction. The dark thing rushed at her, coming as if it would catch her there in the hall. Pam, being a young girl not used to this sort of thing, screamed and jumped back to avoid being added to the pile of unconscious women on the floor. She did a very good job of avoiding capture as she flung herself backwards and to the left. The floor wasn't where it should be. She fell a bit farther than she should have and landed hard. Pam tried to see where she was without moving in case she had landed in some new and far worse location than any of the dangerous places she'd wound up in the last 3 months. Her view was not good. Everything was upside down. That's when she realized she was hanging upside down. Her head was on the floor and her body seemed to be held up by something cold and hard. She used her hands to feel around, trying to figure out what it was. Her fingers came away slimy and sticky. Slimy and sticky is not good. There was light coming in by means of the crack at the bottom of what must be a door. The light showed Pam a trash can filled beyond capacity. Nasty things were piled up all around the container of debris. Next to the trash pile was what might have been a sink. It had been white at one point in time, way back when it was first installed. Now it was gray and black mass with rust stains all down the sides. Pam could hear what some people would call music coming through the far side of the door. It came to her as she was in a bathroom. That would mean the slimy, sticky thing must be a toilet. Ooh, the smell became obvious. Pam wiggled her body around until her feet came into view. She managed to swing sideways and swivel at the same time without touching the nasty porcelain thunder god any more than she already had. Now on her knees, she used her well-developed leg muscles to get her into her feet without having to place her hands on the floor. Just for a second, she wondered why there was a mirror above the toilet. She rushed to the sink as if it held the life-saving fluids. Ooh! There was no soap, and the hot water was cold, but it did remove some of the slimy ick from her fingers. As she stood there scrubbing away the toilet residue, the door swung open and a man walked in. He was dressed in what might have been a plaid suit. It was yellow with black stripes. His body was shaped like a pear that had hung on a tree far too long, and he was quite thoroughly drunk. He stared at Pam, who was staring at him. "Hey, you're a girl, I think." Pam didn't know if she should be angry by this drunken declaration or just upset. She took a quick look at her outfit. The black leather jacket was a lot too big, and her schoolgirl skirt gave her a schoolgirl look. Her hair was growing back, so she no longer sported the lopsided mohawk. "Well, yes, you see, I was just..." Pam had no idea how to respond. "How about a dance?" The drunk lunged at her. Pam, not being fond of drunk and dancing partners, and having seldom danced with anyone twice or maybe 3 times her age, ducked under his outstretched embrace and beat a hasty exit, kind of like jumping out of the proverbial frying pan. The room she had escaped into was far from sanctuary. The bathroom had only one drunken adversary. Now Pam was facing a throng of would-be dance partners if dancing was what they had in mind. The room had somehow grown dead silent. All eyes were on her. If there had been a cricket in the room, he would have sounded like a giant. The air was still, and smoke hung like a vampire bat near the ceiling. Then somebody began to applaud. "Dance! Dance! Dance!" The call for entertainment moved from one to all. "Hey, you get your butt up there and do your thing!" This came from an enormous man behind the bar. Pam looked at the stage with a chrome-plated pole mounted in the middle. She gave the crowd her best smile to tell them she was not dangerous, and then bolted for the door. She used all those muscles she had trained over the summer to dart across the darkened tavern. She felt a hand on her arm, but simply darted to the side to avoid any unwanted contact. The door slammed to the side as a mountain of flesh filled the space. Someone was coming in. Pam dove sideways and down and slid out under his uplifted right foot. The floor was well lubricated by the former contents of beer glasses and stomachs. Her slide to freedom was halted as she came up against the bumper of a car parked close to the door. As the exit closed on its springs, the parking lot grew dim, allowing Pam to slip away unnoticed. The phone on Hildy's desk began to ring. Seeing as it was nearly midnight, nobody was around to answer. The Bag folks had gone home, not knowing if they would ever see their boss's niece again. Mr. Armstrong was in his office cleaning his second favorite gun. He did this when he was faced with an unpleasant task, or when he was worried, usually about Pam, or when the gun needed cleaning. Does somebody want to answer that thing? He yelled in a way that should get anybody within a mile of him to leap to their feet and grab the noisy device. He already knew nobody was around to make the thing still its ringing. He just yelled out of habit. When the ringing continued, well past what any reasonable, sane person would have allowed, Mr. Armstrong set his labors aside and ascended the stairs. The desk was near the door to the basement. He lifted the handset and said, "What?" as if ending the life of some prisoner on death row. "Mr. Armstrong, thank God it's you. I was going to call home, but I don't have my cell phone, and I suddenly realized I can't remember the number because I always just call home button, so I had to call the office. And I was just hoping somebody would still be there." Pam had to stop talking long enough to catch her breath. Mr. Armstrong was overjoyed by hearing from the missing teen. He took just a second to clear any sound of emotions from his voice. "Where are you? I'll come pick you up." He hoped he didn't sound worried or concerned. Pam looked around to see if she could see a street sign. I'm at Götterdammerung and Hades. I guess I'm on the south side of town." She felt a chill in the air, even though it was nearly 80 degrees. Mr. Armstrong nearly choked. "Are you safe? Do you have a gun with you? Is there anybody nearby you might need killing?" Even the cops didn't like to patrol Götterdammerung and Hades. "Stay put, I'll be right there." He slammed the phone into the cradle and barged out the door. Pam stood there, still holding the phone to her ear, waiting and praying that rescue would arrive soon. The convenience store she was standing in front of was well on its way to becoming a smoldering heap. It had been burning since she arrived here to use the payphone. It was a good thing she was acquainted with old-style technology, since this phone had a rotary dial, just like the phone at the office. There was movement out in the street. It looked as if all the people who had been ignoring the fire found the sight of a young girl standing by a payphone a thing of interest. Pam was just about to try running for it when the sound of a siren came to her ears. The police? Maybe it was the fire department. She looked in the direction of the high-pitched sound and spotted a camouflaged Honda Ridgeline come flying down the street, red and blue grill lights flashing out a warning, "Get out of the way or else." The truck skidded to a stop right next to Pam. As Mr. Armstrong stepped out, the several dozen denizens of the night all suddenly lost interest in Pam. They could recognize when the top of the food chain had arrived. "Are you okay? Do you need to go to the hospital or the police station? Or just home?" Mr. Armstrong was startled by his feeling of relief, finding his favorite person was still alive. Pam felt so much safer now. "I'm okay, but I lost Barbara, and I need to let my mom know I'm still alive. she's going to be pissed. It's okay. I called your folks and told them you were still with us. I told your mom she wasn't to ground you or take away too many privileges. They arrived home after midnight. Paula was more relieved Pam was not harmed than she was mad about her being gone most of the night, and this being a school night. Well, yes, but technically I don't have school tomorrow. I'm on a field trip working out of the office. Pam ran out of voice long before she'd pleaded her case. Pam looked at her mom with that look in her eyes. Pam's eyes, not her mom's. There's something I need to tell you, or ask is more the word. Paula felt her knees grow weak. She felt the pocket of her housecoat looking for the pack of cigarettes that she didn't have. Paula had never smoked in her life, but she suddenly had an overpowering urge for nicotine. Had there been any booze in the house, she would have gone looking for it. Pam staggered on. See, it's just that Barbara is now lost in some kind of a weird mirror land, and I feel bad because I don't really feel all that bad about it. Paula just stared at her kid. I was sort of responsible for her going in the first place, and then when she ran at me screaming, I just kind of threw her away and she vanished, and I don't know where. Paula felt as if she should say something, although she had absolutely no idea what. Did you force her to go? She put one hand in her pocket, feeling for the cigarettes that she didn't have. No, not so much. Pam sounded just a bit squeaky. Is this Barbara person an adult? Paula was searching for answers to Pam's questions. Pam just nodded her head. I'm sure, well, not really, that this Barbara woman will be okay, if we're very, very lucky. You should go get a shower, maybe a few showers, and get to bed. You'll need to be well rested if you're going to be working with Angie tomorrow. Pam turned towards the stairs to her, well, the guest room, feeling a bit better about not feeling bad about her missing friend. Mr. Armstrong said I shouldn't be too hard on you, seeing as you're trying to save the universe. As Pam clomb the stairs, heading to her room, well, okay, the guest room, she wondered how was it Mr. Armstrong had so much influence with her mom, and how was it her mom knew Madame Dingus, and what was she, Pam, going to do to rescue Dolores, and Barbara, and all the missing kids. Yes, it looked as if she were trying to save the universe, well, at least the part that circled around her. Chapter 12. What Evil Lurks? Pam was sitting at her desk. The piles of paperwork made seeing anything impossible. Papers were stacked high on the old wooden bureau. Papers were stacked on the floor all around the tiny room. There was just a path wide enough for one young teen to squeeze through in order to reach her desk. There were even papers piled up under her chair. All the files Sharma and Dan had found were set neatly on the shelf by the window, sorted by possible relevance and date. The rest of the mass of bookkeeping was what Madame Dingus had gotten from her sources inside the police department, as well as the sheriff's office. Pam was looking at every missing persons case dating back to when some guy named Millard Fillmore had been the president. Had they been sorted by date, Pam could have ignored anything more than 30 years old. But no, these files were stacked as if using some unknown inner voice directing things, which was how Madame Dingus had done it. Madame Dingus had stood with her eyes closed and directed the staff to place those files there and these files over yonder. She had then advised Pam to get busy and find the answers needed to put this case to bed. Pam reached up to the top of the first pile and pulled down a file folder. Opening it, she read, "Missing. One black Labrador named Spot." Oh man, they sent the missing everything files. She tossed the file onto the empty space available under the desk. It was going to be a long day. When no sudden flash of enlightenment came to Pam, she decided it was time for a break. Wandering out past the reception desk, she spotted Hilda sitting at the desk. For those of you who just refused to go back and read The Bag Company Goes Squatching, Hilda and Hildy are identical twin sisters, but there's a lot of doubt as to whether or not they're the same person or not. Morning is all Hildy managed to say. I just wanted to talk to both of y'all. That sounded just so lame. Hilda was the exact opposite of her sister. If her sister was in fact real, or not, that is. Whereas Hildy was grumpy and lazy, always dressed as if going hiking in the woods, Hilda wore colorful outfits, more designed for a 15-year-old dance. Her outlook was bright and cheerful. She was just here a minute ago. She had to run upstairs, so I'm manning the desk while she's out. Well, up. Hilda gave Pam a big smile. Let me know when I can talk to you both. Pam made a beeline for the coffee shop. Eddie filled a cup and slid it across the counter. The cream and sugar were already in, since he knew how each and every one of the team took their coffee. Pam looked at the door to be sure no one, Hildy or Hilda, were lurking on the other side. Do you think those two are the same? They just can't possibly be the same person. You know the old saying, lightning never strikes twice? Pam looked at Techno, hoping he could shed some light on this dilemma. You're starting the same question plaguing most of the staff. There's a bet going as to whether they're the same person or not. He held up a sheet of paper with names and cash amounts written on it. It looked as if everybody was betting they were in fact the same person. No one is betting they're actually two people? Then Pam saw a $5 bet. Oh, wait, Wanda says they're not the same. Pam looked over at Wanda Murkowski. Wanda was still in the same spot she'd been occupying for the last 6 years, give or take a few months. Did you write this? Eddie looked at the entry. No, that's not my handwriting. You don't suppose... They both looked at the woman at the end of the coffee bar. There was a scream from the front desk. Pam and Eddie ran to see what was about to kill the receptionist. Cassandra had come running, walking fast from her office. Hilda was perched on top of the receptionist's desk, her platform shoes wobbling dangerously. In front of her stood a werewolf, clutching a box of sandwich meat under one arm. Snarl, snap, grash, gnarl, said the werewolf. Saliva splattered against the front of the desk. Mr. Varkolic, you're looking hairy today. You need a healing? Cassandra was trying to address the werewolf and hopefully save Hilda's life. Stanley had been known to do bad things when overcome by his inner monster. Stanley Varkolic was, or rather is, a werewolf, but he's not a bad person. He also ran a grocery distribution service and was Eddie's source for all things sandwich and coffee. Wait a second. It's nowhere near a full moon. What's going on here? Cassandra scanned the room, looking for the cause of his transformation. Pam saw the magazine first. Gunfire Under a Full Moon was printed across the front cover. There was a picture of a nice bright harvest moon emblazoned just under the words. Pam grabbed the magazine and flung it under the desk, thus removing the power of the lunar curse from the grocery delivery man. Soon Stanley was back to his old self. His shoes were torn apart since they were never intended to fit werewolf feet, and his shirt was torn down between the shoulders, but other than that, he was as good as new. Stanley only knew about werewolfing from what he'd seen on TV, so anytime anything that looked like a full moon, say a tortilla or a moon pie, caught his eye, he would transform. He'd been working with Cassandra for years trying to fix this quandary. Come on back to my office. I'll give you a healing session to help you relax. Cassandra led Stanley back to her office. Madame Dingus opened her door just in time to miss any danger. Pam, I need you to run over to the DPS and pick up some reports for my investigation. Madame Dingus had always been a bit hard to get along with. Now that she was in charge of Pam, which put her kind of in charge of the entire bag company, it was going to be head just a bit. A huge bit. As soon as the overbearing woman was back in her office, a collective sigh went through the room. Pam headed out the door to see just how many files the Highway Patrol had on missing people. And this is a good place to take a break. It's the hour mark. I will be back soon with the next installment of the Bag Company Back to School. Until next week, this is Chris James for Storytime.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? This ain't murder 3. Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.